My guest today is Cynthia Kurtz. Cynthia, welcome. We are discussing this book, Working with Stories. But first, Cynthia, who are you? And then tell us about working with stories, please.
Okay, very briefly, I was originally an ethologist, which is the study of animal behavior. In fact, I did a little work with complexity back then. Through a lot of a long story, I ended up working in organizational narrative and community narrative, which is very similar to animal behavior. I like to say I switched species, but I'm still doing the same thing. So the work that I do, I call participatory narrative inquiry. And it has two parents. One parent is narrative inquiry, which is a field of research in which experts go out and they interview people and ask them about their lives and what's happened to them. And then they take it back and they do what experts do, and they write their report. And that's a wonderful established field for many decades. But the other parent of what I call PNI is participatory action research. And action research is, I think, a very exciting field, which says that when you do research on people, you change them because they're people, right? And you're people. So research is action, and action is research. And so in action research, there's a participatory element where you do research together with the people that you're studying. And so this work is a marriage of the ideas of story examining analysis with a participatory element. So we get people to tell stories, but we then ask them to look at their own stories and interpret them, talk about them, and we can learn a lot more and help people a lot more by doing that than if we just told them to fill out a form.
So could you tell us a bit how this relates to, let's say, to economics and complexity?
Yes. People tell stories. We've been telling stories for many, many thousands of years. And we do it for a few reasons. We tell stories to make decisions, to make choices, right? So we consider different options. We talk about things that have happened in the past or things that might happen in the future. And we use storytelling to play with possibility, simulation kind of. We also use stories to negotiate truth. So we are negotiating with other people about what is real and what is not real, what is true. Accountability. You are accountable because you can make an account or a story of what has happened to you. And these things that we do form patterns. So now if you're listening, that sounds a lot like economics because you have choices that people are making, you have negotiations and interactions, and you have patterns that form among those things to create economic trends. So there's a very strong connection there in that sharing stories and telling stories to each other is one of the crucial ways that we do these things. And so it makes sense that that's connected to economics. The way I connect it to complexity, again, another very easy one, is that stories form complex patterns. They form emergent patterns. You will hear rumors that grow and grow and create things. And at the same time, complexity is all about stories, right? Emergent behavior is a story. And so every complex pattern, the history of it matters. And so these two things are very much interlinked in the basic mechanisms of what's going on.
What's the value of PNI? What would you say about that?
The main value, as I see it, is that you can go out and you can ask people for their opinion, and they will give you what I call their poker face, right? What they're supposed to say, right? And people do this, they have surveys and interviews and things, and I've seen people, do that. You can watch them, how they put their face together for you, But then when you just go around that and say, okay, but can you tell me what happened the last time you were at the doctor? Or can you tell me what happened the last time you were unsure what to do in a situation, maybe a choice that you were making? You can see people change the sorts of things that they're telling you. Because sharing stories with each other is a different modality of communication, it's more authentic, it's deeper. It goes deeper into our emotions and the meaning that we have in things. And so when you talk to people in that way, you're getting something richer. And when you talk to lots of people in that way, those patterns that build up are much different than the survey questions. And so what we do with PNI is sort of a deep dive. And we find that, and what I like to say is it's all about surprising ourselves. There's always a surprise in every project, things that we had never expected to find. And that's what's exciting about it, I think.
You've done many of such projects. And,
yes.
This book is really a very rich source of all the work that you have done. So I think it would be very nice if you could give us one or more examples how it works in practice.
Yeah, it's hard to pick projects to talk about, but I was thinking about this economics connection, and one I was thinking, the two projects I was thinking was, one was a project on theft in shops, and looking at patterns of where we were asking the police, tell us about some of the things that have happened, and looking at the differences between why different people choose to steal from shops. And we found some very interesting differences and surprising differences between amateur thieves and professional thieves. And store conditions that will thwart one group actually make you more open to, more vulnerable to the other group. And so that if you're thinking of only one group, you may make a mistake. And then the other project that was similar, again economic, is about volunteering. And again, we asked people, tell us about your experiences volunteering. Why are you doing it? What happened the first time you did it? When did you feel good about it? And we found that there were two types of volunteers, that some people did it for a sort of active, they want to change the world, right? And then there was another group of people who didn't really care about that, they wanted connection. And so what we found out, and this was funded by a consortium of groups that had volunteers, was that if they rewarded in such a way that the one group was happy, the other group was less happy. Yeah. So they had to sort of tailor their response to the motivation that people had for doing the volunteering. So these are the kind of surprises that we're often finding out in projects that we would never have guessed going in.
So could you in this last example elaborate a little bit on what was done with the result and what would have been different if let's say a more traditional way of investigating this was followed?
Right. Well, one of the problems with being a consultant is that you often don't hear the end of the story. I always ask, but sometimes people say, no, you're done, go away, you know. But I believe in this one that the groups that funded the work got together and talked about the results that we found and made some decisions about how they were going to support volunteering. A lot of times people come to me to do projects after they've done the more normal things, and they can't get very far because they give people a survey. In fact, someone was just showing me a survey for their work. Do they have support in their work? And it says things like, I feel supported in my work. I am able to accomplish my goals. I call that a do you want to keep your job survey, right? Yeah. You get a lot of camouflage behavior when you ask these obvious things. Yeah. So, but when you actually asked about the stories, tell me what happened, people kind of forget to do that. And so you get things, so in that instance, I doubt that we would have found these differences in motivation by asking people the standard questions because they would have given the standard answers. Yeah. That's the difference.
Yeah, and the people asking you to do such a project, need they to be brave in a way because they are losing, as it were, control of whatever the answers will, the stories.
You mean the person who's telling the stories or the people who are doing the project?
The people who ask you to do the project.
Oh yes, they do. They do have to be brave. And I've had sometimes when people pulled out and said, no, we can't. We want to do this, but it's too much, we can't do it. But it's my job to help them, to find a way that they can be comfortable enough to ask the questions they need to help. And one of the things we find that is an indicator of a good project is gratitude. So if you've done it right, a certain percentage of the people will, unbidden, say to you, thank you for asking me this. Now, can you imagine someone saying, thank you for showing me this survey? But when people tell stories, they will say, I really want to express my gratitude for this work that you're doing. And when that happens, you know you've done it right, because the people who are telling the stories, they're getting as much out of it as the people who are trying to learn something.
What are some of the pitfalls of doing such a project? Now I'm looking at it from the, let's say, the consultant side.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I've hit all of them. I think one of the biggest pitfalls is that it seems magical. And people talk about stories and the wonder of stories. And yes, it is magical, but it does take some work too. It is intensive, and you know, you have to go out and collect all the stories, and you have to talk to people, and it's hard to get people to participate sometimes. So, you know, it's just as hard as any other kind of work, but it is, I call it high input, high output. So, yeah, it's not for the faint of heart. But the good thing is that if you start small, you get better and better at it as you go, and eventually it becomes a very comfortable thing to do.
Yeah, you said earlier that you don't often see the end results. Is that indeed in the nature of this method, that it is in a way open-ended and that it is participatory, so that what will happen and will happen even after, let's say, the project itself is open-ended by definition.
Yes, it is, and it changes the whole organization or whoever it is you're talking to. So yes, but I mean, part of it is just that I do a lot of coaching, and I'm very interested in helping other people learn how to do this, and so I want them to do their own learning. So I stand in the back, and so they are getting the discoveries and things, and that's the way I like it.
Yeah, yeah. And this book, why did you write a book?
Well, because for a long time I was working on this, and we were doing projects, and you know, lots of big government organizations and large corporations, and I just felt that these great ideas that we had should be available to everyone, to every small group that, you know, wanted to get a park in their town or something like that. And I wanted, and people were talking to me about it and saying, how do you do this? And I wrote the first edition. It was very, very short, and people, you know, were saying, oh, tell me more, tell me more. And so I said, okay, I'll just keep going, you know.
And this this methods, this P&I, is it, let me call it, culturally neutral? Can I use it in Asia as well as I can use it in Africa, as I can use it in the United States or in the Netherlands, whatever? Or is it linked to a certain cultural attitude?
I think it is universal because stories are universal. However, it has been harder selling the idea in some places, and the absolute worst has been my own country in the US, because, as you said, it takes some courage to say, instead of showing people this survey where we already know what all the answers are, we're just going to open up and say, go ahead, you tell us about your day, you tell us about your experience. That takes a little bit of courage, and so sometimes people don't want to go that far, but in certain areas it's been very popular. Sometimes I explain it and people say, oh, that's perfect, and other times people say, I'm not sure about that. So there are some cultural issues to just openness to listening.
And is it, let's say, is this a traditional thing that people tend to do, as you said? Has it been pushed to the background because of, let's say, development of statistical techniques?
Well, we actually used statistics in this work. We used a combination of qualitative and quantitative, so we used mixed method analysis, although that is subservient to people talking to each other. So we use those techniques so that anyone who loves that, they can have it, but we don't let it drive the process. The process is driven by discussion and group dynamics, and so you know, we try to please different people.
Yeah, I was referring to let's say, my own field, as it were, economics, where we have seen over the past 80 years or so that there has been a tendency to trying to model the economy and trying then to make your decisions on the basis of that model. So a little bit less appreciation for experience and what has happened.
Well, actually, modeling is one of the things we do in this work, but it's a dynamic modeling. So it's done by the people who are telling the stories, and it's done based on the stories basically support the modeling, and it's a way to test models too. What's one thing we will do is we'll collect some stories, and then we'll take a published model, and we'll say, okay, let's see how it works, because it's a real-world test to see how does it match up. You can find gaps and problems in models by comparing them to the things that people actually experienced. So I think that it's sort of I call it ground truthing, that you can test your theories against what's really happening on the ground.
Finally, is there one thing that you would really like to convey that we haven't touched upon yet? Of course, you cannot touch upon the very richness of all what's in this book and what's about PNR. Is there anything that you really would like to mention before we close here?
I think I would like to encourage people to learn more about just the way storytelling is, and listening to each other's stories is a part of everyday life, and it's a part of everything we do, all of our business and everything. And learning more about it, whether you follow this particular technique or not, it can actually enrich a lot of the different things that you do. So that's worth learning more about.
Just do it.
Yes,
Start to do it and be open to it. That's basically your message. And therefore, I conclude by showing again this wonderful book, Working with Stories. And Cynthia, thank you very much for this talk today.
Thank you.